The State Museum of the History of Religion has a unique collection that gives a complete picture of the history of the origin and development of religion from ancient times. Paradoxically, the exhibits of the anti-religious exhibition of 1930, which was deployed in the halls of the Winter Palace, were the basis of the museum's exposition. 2 years later, in 1932, the official opening of the museum was held in Kazan Cathedral. After the return of the cathedral to the Russian Orthodox Church in 2000, its exposition was located in the historical estate of Count Sergei Yeguzhinsky, Peter the Great's companion. The origin of the museum was put by Vladimir Bogorastan, prominent Russian anthropologist and researcher of the peoples of Siberia. The fact that such a personality in Russian science put the origin of the museum determined its fate. First of all, the museum was included in the system of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. In the permanent exhibition of the museum, there are a variety of collections associated with the Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism. Numerous rooms where the religions of China, Japan, and India are represented give a complete picture of the oldest religion, Buddhism. In 1932, in the year the museum was founded, we received huge collections and objects from the Hermitage, the Russian Museum, the Durban Museum of Local Lore, History, and Economy, the Historical and Linguistic Museum, and the Central Anti-Religious Museum from Moscow. Today, the collection of the museum has about 200,000 exhibits, the earliest of which date back to the 6th century BC. In the Fund of the History of Eastern Religion, there are also valuable archaeological exhibits originating from the territory of Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan has the oldest culture, the richest history, and deep local traditions. Indeed, our cold, rainy St. Petersburg and warm, sunny Uzbekistan are connected by rather deep spiritual grounds. A significant part of the fund is made up of items collected in the middle of the 20th century. The curator of the museum, Valentina Mazurina, told us about the archaeological collection from the Buddhist cult complex of Karatepe of 2nd to 4th centuries BC. In the 1970s, she was engaged in archaeological research on the ancient settlement of this monastery as part of the expedition. Many of these exhibits were found during her work at the excavation. The sculpture was located on a small platform, and we found this head at the foot of it. We called it the head of Devata. Fragments of wall painting from Karatepe became a unique find. The cave rooms of the Buddhist cult complex were decorated with monumental narrative painting depicting Buddhist symbols and Buddha himself. Fragments of sculptures, ritual utensils, and numerous vessels were often decorated with an inscription of ancient Indian alphabet with Bactrian script. Here's one of them. It is the vessel for the water of a monk, Jivananda. Some of the inscriptions were even read. This was done by our Orientalist Vladimir Lifshitz, who read the Bactrian inscription, and Victoria Vitogradova from Moscow. She read Brahmid Harothi. There are inscriptions that could be read and which tell about this little pottery fragment, its history, its purpose, and its function. The Islamic department in the museum has 2,000 exhibits. These are the Qurans, objects of decorative and applied arts, photographs, as well as works by Russian artists who linked their lives with Islamic culture. The museum received most of the objects related to Islam in 1947. Nevertheless, we managed to have a section devoted to Islam in the permanent exposition of the museum for a long time. In Russia, Muslim shrines were always treated with great respect. A document of 1779, the end of the 18th century, with a description of the book is preserved. It was compiled by Johann Beckmeister, librarian of the Imperial Library of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The description says, the noblest of the books are the Al-Qurans. Except for them, we have extracts from the Qurans with interpretation, several prayer books written in perfect beauty. Of course, only a man in love with the East could write such a text. The prize of the collection is a facsimile copy of the Great Muslim Shrine, a copy of one of the early manuscripts of the Quran, dated about first quarter of the 8th century. This folio is revered among the Muslims as the original list of the Quran, bloodstained of the Caliph Usman. The original is kept in Uzbekistan. It is a huge volume of 323 sheets with 12 text lines. Undoubtedly, every book, meaning the Quran, has its own fate, and the Usman's Quran is no exception. There are several versions of how the Usman Quran was brought to Uzbekistan. Some scholars believe that it was brought from Baghdad in the 10th century by the theologian Abu Bakr Kafal al-Shashi. Returning from the Mecca after the pilgrimage, he healed from the illness the Constantinople ruler and as a reward asked for the Usman Quran. According to the well-known Hungarian Orientalist Armen van Beri, traveling under the guise of a dervish through Central Asia, as early as 1863 in Samarkand, in the mausoleum of Amir Timur in the middle of the tomb, he saw, as he writes the Quran, on the skin of a gazelle. According to van Beri, he heard from many faithful people that this is the copy of that was written by the second caliph. The famous commander Timur brought with him the shrine from the treasure of the Turkish Sultan Bayezid in Bursa. Later, the Usman Quran was kept in the Hoja Ahrar Mosque of the Sheikh of the Sufi order who lived in the 15th century. In the 1870s, the original Usman Quran was taken from the Hoja Ahrar Mosque in Samarkand to Tashkent in the quarters of von Kaufmann, Governor-General of the Turkestan region, then to St. Petersburg, to the Imperial Public Library with the words, "It is necessary to take measures so that precious for science antiquity does not get out of hand." In 1905, the Russian Orientalist Uspensky and Pisarev made a facsimile copy of the original Quran, precisely reproducing the original. Here in St. Petersburg were issued 50 such facsimile copies. Some of them have remained in Russia, others have gone around the world. Such copies of the Usman Quran are kept in Istanbul, the Middle East, Central Asia, and even in the Columbia University of the United States. Here in the museum are stored 4 facsimile editions of the Usman Quran. In the late 19th century, it was kept in a non-Muslim area in St. Petersburg, and thank God, in 1924, it was returned first to Ufa and then to Tashkent, to its rightful place. In the archives of the museum, there is a unique photo of this historical event for Muslims. The museum's collection holds over 320 photographs related to Uzbekistan. They cover the period from the second half of the 19th century to the 1980s. The earliest of them were made by Samuel Dudin, as well as by Mikhail Masson and Vasily Vyatkin, outstanding researchers of the art history of Central Asia. In addition to the photographs of unique architectural monuments and numerous photographs of the Muslim community during the prayer at the beginning of the 20th century, the collection has rare photographs of the 1960s to 70s with the chairman of the spiritual administration of the Muslims of Central Asia and Kazakhstan, His Eminence Mufti Ziavuddin Han Babakhanov, who is extremely revered among the people to this day. The exposition of the Islam religion presents a variety of collections closely related to the cultural and religious traditions that existed at various stages of the history of Uzbekistan. We show you prizes of the collection, copies of the Usman Quran, archaeological monuments, and priceless archival photographs. No less interesting are the works of decorative and applied arts of Uzbekistan. These are objects closely connected both with the religious cults and with the life of people. Of particular interest is the collection which is related to Sufism. This is the clothes from the Central Asian wandering dervishes. It was often decorated with embroidery despite the ascetic way of life, and the headdresses of cloth and velvet were embroidered with silk threads. The invariable attributes of dervishes were the vessels for collecting alms. They were called kashkuli or kadu. They were created from calabash, from coconut, and from metal. Metal kashkuli were decorated with embossing and engraving. In the East, the amulets cases, tumars, were extremely popular. There are the surahs from the Quran, and the benevolent inscriptions were laid. Exquisitely decorated with ornaments and inlaid with enamel, they were perceived as jewelry. Muslim consciousness also linked other types of decorative and applied arts of Uzbekistan with magical ideas. In this connection, we can fully explain the interest of the State Museum of the History of Religion in the creation of various collections. The magic of embroidery was in their patterns. They carried the symbolism of the spiritual life of people from ancient times. Flower motifs of Bukhara school or astral motifs of Samarkand, all of them carry the idea of goodwill and protection from evil eye. The formation of this collection began in the 1930s. This is mainly embroideries of the 19th, early 20th centuries. But perhaps the only kind of embroidery that has a direct bearing on the religion of Islam are joy namazes, or prayer rugs. This is a kind of microcosm, symbolically separating the believer during the prayer from the outside world. An obligatory detail is the image of the arch, the mihrab niche, the divine gates or so-called peculiar zone of the transition from the mortal world to the heaven world. A huge place in the museum staff work was devoted to the study of these objects and religion as a universal phenomenon of human culture. The museum's collection has a valuable exhibit, created in a Muslim environment but belonging to secular art. This is a gold-embroidered robe created in the workshops of the Emir of Bukhara. It dates back to the late 19th, early 20th century. In a museum documents, it is localized as a robe of the Emir of Bukhara. Copper engraving and forged utensils, kungans of toba and dastashui for ablution. Exquisite in form and ornament, They were necessary attributes of life in Central Asia. Copper work masters perfectly do coining, forging, and inlaying with semi-precious stones. The State Museum of the History of Religion has a lot of unique exhibits, which were brought by scientists of museum from Uzbekistan in the last century. For example, this microscopic Quran in a metal frame of the 19th century. Or this little spell book, also of the 19th century, which is written in two languages. One part is written in Old Uzbek language, or scientifically Chagatai language, and the other is in Arabic. Two multilingual texts were created at different times, but were gathered in a single leather cover. This prayer book was brought to the museum in 1940. These Jewish documents are also the unique exhibits of the museum. They were brought to the museum in 1936 thanks to a private person from Samarkand. These are two marriage contracts in the Aramaic language. They are called Ktuba. One of them was compiled in 1692 between Dat, the son of Khalif, and the widow Gulmo, the daughter of Abraham. The second contract was drawn up 2 centuries later. It was signed by the rabbi of the Samarkand Jewish community in 1919. Turn attention to the image of the 6-pointed star. It is called Magen David, the shield of David. This is a common symbol of Jewish culture, which in this case was the guard to the young family from the evil eye. The works of Russian artists who lived and worked in Uzbekistan are of considerable interest for studying the culture and religion of Uzbekistan. These are people who worked in Tashkent and Samarkand. For example, Sidarenko and Bure. They impressed me the most. For me, these are really valuable exhibits of our Islamic collection. In their paintings and pencil sketches, they could show the distinctive Asian flavor, the appearance of old buildings, and the way of life of that time. The first exhibition of Richard Carl Sommer took place in 1915. Master of architectural landscape and talented painter, he carefully drew the details of his compositions. The collection of the museum also contains works by the Samarkand artist Lev Bure and paintings by Vyacheslav Sidarenko, as well as watercolors and drawings of St. Petersburg's artists and architects traveling in Central Asia at different times. The State Museum of the History of Religion is a completely secular, neutral space where valuable exhibits about different religions are stored and studied. We're in close contact with the Muslim community of St. Petersburg. We organize joint educational projects and programs. Non-religious people also always come to our museum. We do not give anyone a preference in this sense, and our task is to bring knowledge. Our task is the enlightenment, and in no case the spreading of various dogmatic views of this art or that religion. It was Project Treasures of the Cultural Legacy of Uzbekistan in the World Collections. Shahnoza Ganiyeva, thank you for your attention.